Every generation of the NFL produces a coach who becomes larger than the job itself. A coach whose presence, philosophy, and sheer gravitational pull define an entire era of football. And then there's Mike Tomlin. A man who somehow managed to become a cultural icon without ever losing his cool, a man who delivered some of the greatest press conference one-liners in league history, and a man who held together a franchise for nearly 2 decades with the same calm intensity most people reserve for ordering coffee. Because let's be honest, if you've ever watched a Tomlin press conference, you know he has exactly 2 emotional settings: unbothered and slightly more unbothered. But behind that deadpan exterior is one of the sharpest defensive minds the league has ever seen. A coach who built his identity through structure, discipline, and a defensive philosophy that evolved with the sport itself. Before the NFL ever knew his name, Tomlin was already carving out a reputation in the shadows of college football, the kind of places where coaches don't get headlines, they get calluses. He started at VMI, grinding through long nights and longer film sessions, teaching defensive backs who weren't destined for Sundays, but still demanded the same level of detail. From there it was Memphis, then Arkansas State, then Cincinnati. Each stop a different challenge, a different roster, a different set of problems to solve. But the through line was always the same. Tomlin's obsession with structure, technique, building defenses from the ground up instead of inheriting them fully formed. He wasn't climbing a ladder so much as he was sharpening a blade. By the time the NFL came, he wasn't a young coach looking for a break. He was a fully formed defensive mind waiting for the right laboratory. Tomlin didn't come from a famous coaching tree. He didn't inherit a dynasty. He didn't walk into the league with hype or pedigree. He built himself through small school grind, through schematic evolution, through mastering the details that most coaches overlook. And when he arrived in Pittsburgh, he didn't just take over a legendary franchise. He became the next chapter of its identity. Every great coach has a system that shapes them, not just emotionally, but structurally. For Mike Tomlin, that system was the Tampa 2. And Tampa Bay wasn't just a stop on his resume, it was the laboratory where his defensive mind was forged. When Tomlin joined the Buccaneers in 2001 as the defensive backs coach, he stepped into one of the most advanced defensive ecosystems in NFL history. This was the peak of the Dungy-Kiffin Tampa 2, a scheme built on 2 high safety shells, a middle linebacker dropping deep to replace a third safety, corners rerouting receivers to protect the seams, a 4-man rush that had to win without blitzing, and zone match principles that required elite communication. Tomlin wasn't just coaching technique. He was learning the architecture of a defense that demanded precision at every level. He studied how Derek Brooks played the hook curl like a hybrid safety, how Rondé Barber disguised coverages and triggered downhill without tipping leverage. He studied how John Lynch manipulated quarterback reads by holding his depth until the last possible second. These weren't just players. They were prototypes for a system that relied on speed, angles, and anticipation instead of brute force. Tampa Bay didn't just give Tomlin a job. It gave him a defensive identity, one rooted in structure, disguise, and disciplined aggression. When Mike Tomlin arrived in Minnesota in 2006, he wasn't just stepping into a new role. He was stepping into a test, a chance to prove that the principles he learned in Tampa could evolve into a system of his own. As the Vikings defensive coordinator, Tomlin inherited a roster built to stop the run. Pat Williams and Kevin Williams were the most dominant interior duo in football, but the secondary was young, inconsistent, and unproven. Tomlin didn't copy-paste the Tampa 2, he adapted it. Minnesota finished first in run defense, 8th in total defense, and they were top tier in explosive play prevention. They did it with a secondary that had no Pro Bowlers. Tomlin's play calling in Minnesota would feature a light blitz usage, rotational disguise, zone match principles, run-first structural integrity, and calculated aggression. He wasn't a gambler. He was a strategist. Minnesota wasn't just a proving ground. It was the moment Tomlin showed the league he wasn't just a product of the Tampa 2. He was an architect in his own right. When Mike Tomlin arrived in Pittsburgh in 2007, he wasn't inheriting a blank slate. He was inheriting a defensive empire, the Dick LeBeau Zone Blitz Dynasty, a system built on pressure, disguise, and post-snap chaos. And the question wasn't whether Tomlin could lead the team. It was whether he could integrate his Tampa 2 background into a franchise defined by an entirely different defensive language. Tomlin didn't walk into Pittsburgh and force the Tampa 2 onto a roster built for fire zone pressure. He did something far more impressive. He merged two defensive philosophies that, on paper, shouldn't coexist. What Tomlin inherited, the LeBeau 3-4 zone blitz, featured two-gap defensive line controlling blockers, edge rushers as hybrid outside linebackers, fire zone pressures, five-man rush, simulated pressures long before they became league-wide trends, and post-snap rotation designed to confuse quarterbacks. Tomlin's early years in Pittsburgh were a masterclass in adaptation. He didn't replace LeBeau's system, he expanded it. Some of the looks in Tomlin's additions would be featured for years to come, such as more quarters, more two-high disguises, and Tampa 2 drops and long yardage. He evolves the system without breaking it, a rare coaching feat. To understand what separates Mike Tomlin from other coaches, you have to look beyond the cliches and into the actual mechanics of how he builds and calls defenses. This is about football architecture, the structural decisions that dictate how a defense behaves before the ball is even snapped. Tomlin doesn't just pick coverages. He designs rules for leverage, spacing, and post-snap rotation that allows his players to play fast without sacrificing discipline. His defenses aren't built on chaos or guesswork. They're built on layers, pre-snap disguise, post-snap clarity, and assignment sound principles that scale no matter who's on the field. Where other coaches chase trends, Tomlin builds frameworks. Where others call plays, he constructs systems, and that's the difference. He isn't just reacting to offenses. He's shaping the pace of the game itself. When you look back at Tomlin's time in Pittsburgh, you don't just see a coaching tenure. You see an era, one defined by structural discipline, defensive innovation, and a level of consistency the modern NFL isn't built to sustain. Tomlin didn't just coach the Steelers. He became part of the franchise's identity. Under his watch, Pittsburgh reached heights that most franchises spend decades chasing. A Super Bowl championship, 2 AFC titles, multiple division crowns, one of the highest winning percentages of any coach in NFL history, and oh yeah, a record that'll follow him forever. Nearly 2 decades without a single losing season. In a league engineered for parity, Tomlin built a program that refused to break. He navigated roster turnover, quarterback transitions, injuries, and shifting offensive errors, arguably multiple of them, and still kept the Steelers competitive every single year. His defenses evolved with the league, his schemes adapted to personnel, and his teams never quit. These weren't just wins, they were always statements. And now, as his time in Pittsburgh has come to an end, the legacy he leaves behind is unmistakable. He leaves a blueprint for defensive structure in the modern NFL, a hybrid of Tampa 2 discipline, zone blitz chaos, and coverage schemes that became the Steelers' defensive DNA. He leaves a standard for organizational stability, a reminder that culture, clarity, and adaptability can outlast any roster cycle. He leaves a reputation as one of the most consistently successful coaches of this generation across all sports. A coach who never let the floor drop out, no matter the circumstances. And he leaves behind a franchise that will spend years trying to replicate the steadiness that he brought to their sideline. And so here we are, less than 14 days from the Super Bowl. The season is not yet over, and we are still left to question the immediate future. And in a shocking turn of events, his replacement is coming the way of Mike McCarthy. Let me know what you guys think of that below in the comments. That should be fun. In any case, Tomlin has told people close to him that if he ever returns to the sideline, he'd want the chance to build something from the ground up. Not inherit a polished machine, but shape a roster, a culture, and a defensive identity from scratch. And even though he isn't pursuing a job this upcoming season, there are already a few teams that come to mind that could serve as good wait-and-see prospects. And these teams would become entirely different the moment he walked through the door. A team like Carolina, for example, is desperate for structure, young quarterback, but fractured identity. They got a defense with raw speed, but no blueprint. Perhaps a place like Washington, a roster with talent, but no defensive spine. These are just predictions. There are possibilities, given Tomlin's calculated approach, and teams certainly worth considering watching over the next few years. As for what comes next, Mike Tomlin's story is far from finished. He's still young by coaching standards. He's still evolving schematically. He's still one of the sharpest defensive minds in football. Whether he takes over another NFL team, steps into a front office role, or becomes the architect of a new defensive renaissance somewhere else, one thing is certain. Wherever Mike Tomlin goes next, he won't just coach. He's going to build, he will adapt, and he will compete. And he'll leave another legacy behind, I am sure. Because coaches like Mike Tomlin don't fade out, they redefine the next chapter. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Catch you on the next one.